It's time to get nerdy, y'all.
A little bit of gaming history for you.
Something relevant in gaming and discuss our opinions on it.
Should we kick it out of here, or should we kick-start it?
This is the part where you, the listeners, try to stump the hosts.
I'm not a lawyer. I just play one on a podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, lads and lasses of all ages, welcome to the show. It is Tuesday, April 9th, and it is time to get nerdy. Welcome to the show. This is episode 303 of Two Nerds in a Pod, the nerdiest video gaming podcast in the multiverse. I am Maction, and I have my co-host, a fellow nerd, a connoisseur of comedy. He is both the first option and the best option. He is Mr. Lam Galuka, also known as Mr. Nice Guy 425. And for the next hour, we're going to cover topics about video games, ranging from video game history all the way to lawsuits, trivia, and everything in between. But first, Mr. Nice Guy, this has been a big week since we recorded last, and we did not get raptured.
We did not. You know what? I never buy into that stuff. I'm like, hey, I'm going to watch the eclipse and have a good time. And I've played enough video games for multiple lifetimes. I've done stuff with my family. If it's the end of the world, it's the end of the world. We're fine, you know? And it wasn't, so
and
we're good.
We feel fine.
But we're still here. Mac, so I'll tell you about my week, and then I'd love to hear about yours.
Please do. What's been going on?
So I got to lead off. You know, we talked about the eclipse. I did do that. And, you know, I'm a good dad. So I pulled my son out of school to watch the eclipse. My son, who's in middle school, he's in 6th grade. They weren't watching the eclipse, and I was like, yeah, he needs to come out of school, like right now. And they were like, yeah, he's your son. You can do what you want. So we went in, we watched the eclipse, and he says I'm Father of the Year. But, Mac, I would say the highlight of this past week was the Midwest Gaming Classic.
Tell me all about it.
Well, I'll tell you about it in like 120 seconds, right? Okay. But it was super fun, man. So I went with a friend of the show, friend in real life of mine, T. Yankum, and we got there right at opening, about 9:30, and the vendors were open. So we started off by doing a little bit of retro game shopping, which I absolutely
love. A handful of cartridges.
I've got a handful
of carts, Slum.
Fistful of carts. That should be the tagline of our documentary someday. Fistful of cartridges. So here's the games that I managed to get. And Mac, as you know, baller on a budget here. So went with a handful of cash, spent like I would say 40% of the cash that I took because I talk people down. I see a price, and my goal is to get the game for as cheap as possible. So here's the games that I was able to cross off my list. Number 1, Battle Unit Zeoth for the original Game Boy, a mech-based game that is super fun. Batman the video game is number 2. Ironically, Batman uses guns in this game, so he's off-brand, but it's a phenomenal, phenomenal game. Was glad to find it. Mega Man 2. Now, the only reason I got Mega Man 2, as much as I love Mega Man, is simply because I bundled it with Batman as a method of talking the people down on price. You know, that's one of the strategies you can use. Hey, if I get both of these, will you give me $5, $10 off? And they said yes. Now, I also managed to pick up Tiny Toon Adventures, Bab's Big Break. Now, this is a game that I had seen on some lists in terms of best platformers. I played through it in a sitting. It's an okay game. I'm glad that I got it. I had fun with it. It was worth the $10 I paid for this one. And then I would say the game that I was most happy to get, because I don't see this game very often. And when I do, it's usually $45, $50. Price charting says it should be much less than that. I managed to get a copy of Gargoyle's Quest for the original Game Boy. Now, the lady who was selling this, the vendor who was selling this, I've bought games from her before, and she's always very willing to negotiate, but likes to feel like she wins, right? So this was listed at $25. I said, hey, will you take 20 for it? She said, I'll take 23. And I said, done, because I literally saw it at other vendors for $45 at the show. So got a super good deal on this and have been enjoying it. Mac, and then I got one NES game, and ironically, it's also Tiny Toon Adventures. Now, you don't find games for $1, $2, $3 very often. This gentleman was selling games. I said, how much for that game? He said, if you buy it now before I put a price tag on it, I'll give it to you for $5. And I was like, I don't know. He's like, I'll give it to you for $3. I was like, done. So I got it, and it is a game that was not on my list, but it was fun. Mac, lots of cool music, lots of cool vendors, lots of cool arcade games, lots and lots of indie games in the Future Class section, and I managed to talk to many of them and give them our business card. So we'll have to talk about that later. But yeah, they had a whole thing of pinball machines. They had virtual reality. They had tabletop, learn how to play Dungeons and Dragons. They had tabletop Warhammer. They had all kinds of food. They had people playing the Contra theme on guitar, cosplayers, Tetris tournaments, Donkey Kong tournaments, World of Nintendo, where they had the old school Nintendo displays for every system, just like when we were kids. A lot of nerds and a lot of cool people. And you know, for 120 seconds, that's what I have got as far as the Midwest Classic. It was great. I loved it.
Fantastic. We will not double check you on that 120 seconds.
Right.
Mr. Nice Guy, I had a very interesting week. I've done a few projects, including but not limited to one I'm really proud about, and that is I finally upgraded my Steam Deck.
Ooh, tell me more. Tell me more. I'm excited to hear.
Friend of the show, Ishmobile, ages ago had provided me with an upgraded SSD for it. And so I had just, kind of drug my heels for ages. So I got the files, I pulled it apart, took the old one out, put the new one in, and you know what? It was no worse than, say, working on a laptop. Maybe a little bit more complicated than putting, a couple of extra RAM sticks in. 10 out of 10, would recommend. Follow the iFixit guide. It'll see you true. So yeah, I think that's kind of the only big one that I want to highlight this week. Mostly it's been boring.
I didn't hear. How much space did you upgrade?
256 is what I upgraded, from 64 to 256. For the price of $399. Once again, thank you, Ishmobile.
Hashtag baller on a budget. I love it. I love it. Well, cool. Mac, on that note, I say we do what we do best. And we hop right up in that gaming news, my friend. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. Mr. Nice Guy, I'm out of the loop. What is new in video gaming?
So much, but we're going to hit like 3 of these stories. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to episode 303 of Two Nerds in a Pod. Those who are here live and those who tune in after the fact, we appreciate each and every one of your sets of ears. Mac, this first news story comes from GameInformer.com by Wesley LeBlanc. Here is what he writes. Amazon Studios' Fallout TV series will premiere one day early with all 8 episodes now hitting Prime Video on April 10th at 6 p.m. Pacific Time. The series was originally due out on April 12th, but Amazon announced it had moved the launch day up to April 11th alongside a new look at the show. Now Amazon has moved the date up one more day, meaning you can check out this live-action adaptation of the post-apocalyptic wasteland tomorrow. Mac, I'm curious. I love Fallout. I would say that I'm a Fallout super fan.
Okay.
And I've played, like, in terms of like Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, Fallout 4. I love those games. How successful do you think a show can be that is based on a universe rather than based on characters walking around and interacting in a universe? I'll give you an example. In The Last of Us, it's Joel and Ellie. Right? And it's Joel and Ellie's story that you've experienced in the game. In Fallout, you create a character. And maybe Fallout's character is you. Maybe you're creating something that's supposed to be you. Maybe it's Oregon Trail style. You're creating a member of your family. Or maybe you're just creating someone unique. Point being, there really is no defined protagonist in these games, but yet they're making a TV show out of it. And we'll see where the story goes. Do you think this is going to work? Do you think it's not going to work? And are you excited for it?
I think it's the type of thing that we want to see. I know that there were a lot of fans of Halo, and they got themselves a series. I haven't heard much about it, so I assume it's middle of the road. But I would love to see more content in these game universes. Sometimes we have a game universe that has just such unplumbed depths. We have maybe side characters that have interesting things going on that we never hear about. And I think this can be a great way to explore those types of things. And I think, especially when you don't tie it to an already existing character, maybe we can have a little bit more grace for if it doesn't turn out to be exactly what we were hoping. So, I mean, I've got high hopes. I'm planning on giving it a watch myself, but I'm gonna wait probably a couple more days and watch it with company, I think.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I guess my thing is, because when you play Fallout, your experience can be different, right? It can be different than other people's. Like, there's some side quests that you may experience that someone else doesn't. It'll be interesting to see if they try to throw in references to stuff that actually happens in game, or if they really just say, "Hey, here's a character," right? And here's their journey in the Fallout universe. Regardless, I'm excited for it, and I'm curious why Amazon is pushing it up a few days. I don't know. I assume it's maybe a money thing. I assume maybe it's a timing thing, trying to avoid releasing on the same day as something else. I really don't care. I'm just excited. So that is that. Here's the next one. This is on Battlefield 2042 on Kotaku.com. No more big updates for DICE's latest FPS, but the Star Wars devs are joining the franchise to help expand it. Battlefield 2042's 7th season is going on now, and it will be the game's last. By the way, this is written by Zach Zweizend. While the online shooter will continue to receive some support, EA and DICE are looking forward to what's next. To help build that future, Motive Studio, the team behind the Dead Space remake, will join the franchise and work on the future game in the series. When it launched in late 2021, Battlefield 2042 was not in a great state. In fact, it was pretty shoddy, content light, and an unstable mess. But over 2 years and following numerous updates, tweaks, and seasons, the massive online FPS is pretty good. 2042's 7th season, Turning Point, launched on March 19th and added new weapons, a new map, a fresh battle pass, and more. But according to a post, this is the end of the road for 2042. So, Mac, this is not a game that you play. It's not a game that I necessarily play a ton. What do you think about a studio pulling resources from an existing game to work on a new one, as opposed to like just keeping it going? Because that's a debate that we always have, right? We always have the conversation about buying a game means you don't own it forever. There's no guarantee that they'll continue to support it. Like, how do you feel about 7 seasons in, game being canceled, when so many others go on forever and ever and ever?
If what we're talking about is that we're sacrificing Battlefield 2042 in order to push those resources to a new game, from the company's perspective, they're probably like, well, squeezed this as dry as we can. It's time to, get our microtransactions and our battle passes and our loot box money through another shiny new IP. I mean, I have an inherently cynical view of it. Just don't really know if I have much hope for the decision to produce a game that is particularly engaging or that tells a story that needed to be told. You know what I mean? But then again, I mean, I don't know. Maybe Battlefield 2042 was that kind of game, and I just don't know because I'm biased against first persons.
Well, I guess my stance is it's unfortunate because...
Oh, sure.
And once again, this is not a game that I'm particularly into, but I think about a lot of the shooters out there and how long they go on. Not even necessarily with new seasonal content, but being tied to some type of continued progression. I still play Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War to this day. That game came out 2020. Like, obviously, there's not new seasonal content, but I can continue to level up. There's still a big community. To see a game that struggled at launch hit its stride and then get canceled to move on to something else, it's a little bit sad for the people who are involved in that game. But, I think that it's better than doing a half effort and having something not be, or rather making it half-baked, continuing to go on, and then having the new game suffer because of it. So that's kind of my stance on Battlefield 2042. But I hope that people who played it had good times with it, and I hope that the new one is Battlefield Bad Company 3, because I loved the sequel a decade ago. Mac, we got one more news story, unless you have more comments on that.
Soon shall be lost to us, and I hardly knew ye.
But, once they give it out for free, sometimes that's the downfall, and they did give it out for free. Well, Mac, this one is a game that might interest you more, and this is a super interesting concept. Interested to hear from you and also the people in the chat. I don't know if you've heard about Star Wars Outlaws. That is a game that is an RPG that now they have announced the release date, and they've announced some other news that I think we should talk about. This is from N4G, and it's written by Alex CO. Following today's release date, new trailer, and different editions reveal for Star Wars Outlaws, more info regarding the game has surfaced, and this one might not sit well with quite a few people, as it looks like an internet connection is required for players to install Star Wars Outlaws. I feel like I don't even need to read any more of the story. Bottom line, Mac, this game is going to be coming out in August. It's a single-player game, but yet internet connection required to download the game. I want to hear your thoughts, and I honestly think that you and I are not going to see eye to eye on this. But what do you think about this?
Is an online connection required for a single-player experience? I mean, I think the answer is objectively no. And I mean, you can make some arguments for needing an online connection when we're talking about a game that, you are playing multiplayer because that's sort of required.
Let me just make sure we're on the same page, because an online connection is just needed to download the update. It's not saying that you need to be always online, but like it's saying in order to play the single player experience, you need to have an internet connection. That
sounds like it's requiring you to be online at all times in order to play the game.
No. It is required for players to install Star Wars Outlaws.
That's so weird to me, because I believe we would have just assumed that you would need to have an internet connection in order to download something.
See, and that's my thing is this really surprising?
Is this news?
And that's, you know what? It's super interesting that you interpreted this as you have to be online when really you don't. You just need to be a human with an internet connection to be able to download the day one update or the single player game that is always existent with these types of things. Now, I think that the controversy from this may be more that technically you put the disc in typically with a single player game, and it downloads, or rather it installs the single player stuff. But then there's also a patch. It sounds like for this, you really have to be on the internet to really even get access. And the disc, which is physical, gives you access to the single player game online. It's so confusing to me, and it makes me so frustrated.
I'm sharing the confusion and the frustration because, that seems weird, but okay.
I guess the thing is, it doesn't make me upset because every game, unfortunately, seems to have a day one patch, whether it's single player or multiplayer, that allows you to then play the game.
Sometimes larger than the download itself originally was.
Well, but here's my thing. Have we ever considered the fact that maybe developers are doing us a favor by doing it this way? Because it means that they're able to fit the single player content on one disc and then just provide us with the rest of the game through storage that they are paying, rather than saying, hey, you're going to need multiple discs. Here's the one for the high resolution textures. Here's the one that you switch to when you get past the first half of the game. Instead of doing all that, they're saying, hey, put in the disc. It's going to put the info that's there onto your console or your PC. And then, hey, guess what? All these other textures and updates and bug fixes, we're just going to have those in the cloud. And you don't have to worry about storing it or finding it unless we take it down, right? So I don't know. In that sense, I've always felt like maybe we give them a bad rap when they're helping us out.
I mean, maybe we could. I suspect that it's actually probably less expensive to host whatever segment of data is needed than it would be to press a second disk. I would not be shocked if it was actually a cost-saving measure to make you download that so that they didn't have to go for a second disc.
And it's interesting you say that. I mean, we have limited time, but I did read another article today that was talking about how the $70 game is not sustainable because it's just too expensive, was the author's argument, and that game companies are going to start trying to find new ways to cut costs. Doesn't mean that they're going to make crappier games or more low-budget games, but they're going to make little measures to make the game cheaper. So maybe this is one of them. Maybe you're correct. point from Ishmobile before we close. Some people don't have the internet bandwidth available to download it all. I get that.
As somebody who was in that boat until very recently, I understand that plight.
Yeah, it's tough. That's been our news for the week.
All right, well, now let's take a look into the past with some video game history. This last week, in years before, we had some fantastic video games come out, and some things that may have shaped video game history as well. I'll start with a couple of fantastic titles that if you haven't played before, I think it's worth putting them on your list, no matter how big your backlog may be. One is a 2014 PC release called Broforce. Hands up if you have played Broforce before in the chat. Mr. Nice Guy, so glad to hear it. Do you happen to have a favorite bro from Broforce?
I have played Broforce so casually, but here's the thing. I like the idea of content. And I like the idea of this type of satire. And maybe you're going to get to this, but that's effectively what it is. And so I really like that about the game. I have a copy of it that I think I got free on either Steam or PlayStation, and I've played it a few times, and it's a good game. It's great.
Yeah, I love the tongue-in-cheek. I love how it's just very much rah, freedom. If you enjoyed Team America World Police, it kind of takes very much that sort of tack. And everything is bro, every character. There's even Ellen Ripley from the Alien franchise, and she shows up and she's Ellen. Instead of Ripley, it's Rip Bro. You got Indiana Brones. You got Brocifers. You got everything in there. Everything's got a bro lean to it. Brobocop. I would be hard pressed to pick just a single favorite bro from Broforce, but I would have to say that the Brofessional. I particularly enjoy his stuff. But all of the different characters have these different sorts of things. They're teeny tiny little figures on the screen in comparison to the whole thing, but it is very much a adventure side scroller shooting game, and with destructible terrain that sometimes definitely goes poorly for you.
You're literally making me want to go play it, because doesn't it have co-op?
It does have co-op. Yes, it does. Lovely.
It's one of those games that would make for a nice fun Friday night, just like a couple hours of Broforce. Like, it's not the game you're going to play over and over again, but it'd be fun to hop into at some point.
Absolutely. If I were coming out there to visit you, I would be like, dude, Broforce time. And it would be great couch co-op. Another game released the year before, actually, 2013, for the PC, a game called Evoland. As you play the game, it evolves new characteristics typical of the evolving video game market. So it very much starts with a style that is reminiscent of early games, moving just left, right, up and down, Zelda style. It goes to 3D, and then sometimes you'll go back into the past, back to 2D, in order to solve like a puzzle. The very meta of it all is that with each movement you make, with each level you complete in the game, you're adding on the new sensibilities. And within a single game, you get basically this sort of cross-section of video game history in general. Is it the tightest experience in the world? No. Is it the best story in the world? No, not at all. It's very generic. But the movement through what is video game history is absolutely what makes that special, I feel like. Evoland, worth a look into. You can usually get it pretty cheap as well. Well, I do have one event, Mr. Nice Guy, from April 4th, 2013.
Yeah.
That is very noteworthy. And perhaps precisely because I was thinking about this in history is what colored my interpretation of of what you said about Star Wars Outlaws, because we are in fact talking about Get Over It. Now, for those of you who don't quite remember, the creative director for Microsoft Studios, a man named Adam Orth at the time, Microsoft Studios had just recently let us know that their plan with the Xbox One was that it was going to be always online. And people did not especially like or agree with that approach at the time. I seem to recall that at that time, I was rocking maybe a 1.5 megabit per second download speed. And for a bit of historical reference, the average US internet connection at that time was only 6.7 megabits per second, with people ranging lower, higher. You know how averages works. But yeah, their response was, as Ishmobile points out here in the chat, things like, do you have phones? Those are always online. Those are always connected. What's the deal? And Adam Orth's tweets, specifically in reference to this afterwards, wound up being commonly cited as this sort of galvanizing moment. It was, sorry, I don't get the drama around having an always-on console. Every device now is always on, and that's the world we live in. Hashtag deal with it. Well, video gamers did not, by and large, hashtag deal with it, of course. And I'm not here to dunk on the man. Heaven knows that earlier when this happened, that like the response from video gamers was not cool and it was not kind. But in 2013, and the reason why I want to mention it was that we as kind of gamers of the world united by calling BS on Microsoft's DRM tactics and always on, always online connected stuff. And after that whole issue, we come forward 11 years, and now for a large majority of games that have been published, at least in the past little while, we do find ourselves trapped by the very future we kind of swore that we would never accept. Sorry to kind of give a somber ending to history today, but I think it's worth asking yourself, what happened? And I don't know as I've got those answers. I don't think any of us have those answers because it's like a complicated thing. But, I think it's worth sitting with that for a moment and asking, what the difference between then and now is and why.
So interesting comment in the chat from our boy G. He says, Microsoft turned out to be correct. Every console is now always online, and digital games from Game Pass and other storefronts require an online check to be playable. More reactionary, emotional. Now, that is not 100% correct. Mac, I know you own one of these bad boys. I know you own a Steam Deck. I know some of them are other people in the chat do as well. And it is not always online. You can play your games offline on this console. Now, maybe you're going to argue this is not a console, it is a PC. Like if you're going on a flight, you can make sure that your Red Dead Redemption, your Dead Cells, whatever game that you're going to play that needs to be updated is set so that you don't have to be logged in order to do it. Now, you have to go through some steps of, updating and whatnot before you go on the trip and then turning off the internet and logging in. But yes, it is possible to play some games offline. I get what you're saying, G, but you don't have to always be online with consoles. Just putting that out.
And I think from my part, I very much definitely want to highlight that I think, there was emotional histrionics from toxic gamers, often directed at Adam Orth. I definitely don't think the grief that he suffered as a result of that was deserved. Nor do many people when the internet piles on them. But I do think that it is worth just acknowledging that, like, a decade ago, we said, absolutely not, get out of here with this nonsense. Sony was just like, hey, this is how we share games, and they handed discs over. Yeah, I mean, everybody and their dog was dunking on Microsoft for something that we now accept to be the standard. Now, I have strong feelings about how that shouldn't be the case, but I think it's worth sitting with that realization that it was only a decade ago that this notion brought up such vitriol, such anger at the idea that our video games were going to be metered out only on their terms. Yet now, it doesn't seem to be such an issue. Maybe that's the starting point for a completely different discussion. However, it was this week, 11 years ago, that the discussion really took off.
Well, thank you for sharing, Mac. It's time to move on to our Indie Game of the Week, a segment where we talk about a game that may need more attention and let you know if it deserves your attention. Mac, this week we're talking about a game called Tell Mari on Steam. It released February 16th, 2024. Both the developer and publisher are Phoenix Blasters. Shout out to the good people over there for providing us with these 2 codes for review. It will not affect our opinion of the game. Now, Mac, this one is interesting because the whole point of this segment is to highlight games that our viewers and that people on the internet may like and just haven't heard of. And this one is one of those where it isn't getting as much attention as maybe it should. Here's the description. Help Tell Mari save her sunflowers on her journey to the demon tree. On this precision platformer with your cat-tastic companion. Face over 100 handcrafted levels where your skill and patience will be tested as you explore the world of Agra. Now the thing that makes this interesting is that it currently has 8 user reviews on Steam, released February 16th, which means that it does not yet have enough reviews for us to know if it's overwhelmingly positive, overwhelmingly negative, mixed, very good, or whatnot, because the minimum isn't there. So let's help these people out and let the internet know what we think. Mac, how'd you feel about it?
Definitely an interesting game. It has some good to it, but sometimes I am held back from a game just because I'm not good enough. And I felt like this was a game that I really struggled with. So obviously, you've probably got the idea from that rundown. You shoot these arrows that you basically pogo around on in order to get up areas. And they start adding on more challenges. You've got specific types of enemies that have like a movement pattern or a movement behavior that you have to look out for. And then they build on that each time, adding the complexity, pogoing off of these arrows that you're shooting up a, cliff face or over a large gap. It can be quite... I don't want to compare it to something like Super Meat Boy, but there's a lot of tight platforming that made it difficult for me. But I thought that the idea had a lot of promise.
Yeah, so it's interesting. And by the way, for those of you that are here live, I did post a link to this game in the chat. I would say this is one of those games that caught my eye because the trailer was really well put together. So when I first saw the trailer, I thought, oh, this has Celeste vibes. And Celeste, in my opinion, one of the best indie games ever made. Precision platformer, multiple ways of solving the levels, really enjoyable. This game, to me, gave off mobile game vibes. That's probably the nicest way I could explain it. In that, you can play some games in your web browser, and that's great, and you play it for a few minutes, when you're supposed to be in class paying attention, but it's not the game that you want to sit down and play when you go home, when you have access to better stuff. And not that simple games can't be great, but Mac, I think about some of the precision platformers that we have played, and they've been much more tight, much more interesting, and somehow found a way of motivating me to want to come back. And I'm thinking of Bzz when I think of this, right? Like that was a precision platformer, and you had to be skilled to get through the levels, and you had to do it quickly. But Tell Mari just didn't give off that vibe. And I think part of it is that your arrows disappear after a while. And
I'm so glad you said it.
Please say more. Do you want to say more about that?
No, I mean, I don't know what more to say. It's like, you need time to set up your escape or your movement. And when it gets complex, it's difficult to set that all up when you've got that ticking clock. And yeah, your plunger arrows would eventually fall off, and you would no longer be able to use those. And I was always getting that last one in the set was falling off before I made it there, and then it was all right, back to the beginning again.
Yeah, and I mean, once again, some people might listen to this and think, well, have you guys ever played Dark Souls? Or have you ever played a difficult
Yes.
game? Yeah, we have played difficult games, and we don't have a problem with difficult games. But a game like this that gives off the vibe of being, hey, solve these 100 levels, have some fun, hop in, hop out. It just, to me, the difficulty level, and almost I would say the lack of diversity of environments, it just wasn't, it didn't grip me like a lot of other games would. And candidly, like the trailer made me think it would. So when I talk about this game, I guess the positives I can say is that it effectively does what it's supposed to do. It is not broken. It is a well-made game. The mechanics in terms of the physics that they've put in here work well. It's just a matter of if you have the patience and the time to play something like this when you could be playing something more enjoyable.
Yeah, I think the criticism there was just not enough forgiveness in the game's mechanics for me to feel like certain goals were achievable, that like certain levels, and it led to just basically being like, well, I mean, this is difficult. I don't know if I want to spend the time really trying to squeeze that last little bit out of it when I know that I've got other games that I could be playing.
Exactly.
And that's the situation. If we were talking, if this was a game that my parents had gotten for me for my Game Boy Advance back in the day, and I knew that I had one game that I could have access to, I would absolutely still be going. And as a matter of fact, that difficulty would probably be serving this well in that situation, in that case. Stretching out that experience, giving me more time, frustration. And as I go to throw my Game Boy against the wall, I think, no, Mac. Take a deep breath. Center yourself. Try again. But in this thing, it doesn't work for me the same way it used to.
Yeah, there was something else I was going to say, but it was probably going to be redundant. Like, bottom line is this game is just, it wasn't for me, but I wish them the best. I can see in part why it only has 8 reviews, and that's not meant to be disrespectful or rude, but candidly, if we came on here and told you that a game is good when it's not, why are we doing this, right? So this is not a game that I can really recommend, especially at $14.99. It gives off mobile game vibes. I think that this should be a $5 game. Mac, what do you think about the price, and what's your rating for this?
It's a little high, but it's hard out there for a game dev. Although I wish it were easier, I'd say somewhere around the 2.5 is where I would give it, because there's nothing wrong with it. It just couldn't hold my attention, and I feel like the difficulty and length of time didn't seem... Now, I did not complete the game because I had other things to do, so I can't speak to the difficulty curve later on, but the difficulty curve exceeded my skills, and I could, in fact, not get good.
Yeah, it's funny, I actually gave it a 2.5, and we're doing it on a 5-point scale. I feel like that's the minimum I would give a game that is not broken, because it isn't broken. Like, it works. Although I will say this. I actually went to go play a little bit more today, because I played this a lot when I first got it. And by the way, first 40 minutes that I played this, I got like 9 of the 20 achievements. So I think that says something as well, which it's kind of weird to get that many achievements that quickly. But I went to go play it again. There's an update. Okay, I'm updating. And I update, and it won't work. It says you're missing this executable file. And so I deleted it from my Steam Deck and downloaded it again, and it still doesn't work. So I don't know if now, and we've had this since launch, so I don't know if now the game is broken or what, but if it is, that's something y'all have got to get fixed. Anyway, best of luck to you. That's our review.
Well, now let's take a look at a crowdfunding project that's trying to get an off the ground. We call this Kick or Kickstart. We've looked at something that's already happening. Let's look at something that's trying to happen. I'm going to post a link in the chat so that you all can take a look and say whether or not you think it should be kick-started or kicked out of here. Now, Lom is seeing this for the first time, so let me bring you in, listeners at home. This is called Overrider, and it is a hoverboarding adventure game focused on movement and combat, third-person stylings, with a few core mechanics, like tricks filling your special bar and then letting you make special attacks with that special bar, aggressively colliding with enemies, and of course grinding on pipes with your hoverboard. There's also this really interesting dynamic of energy balance, where it costs energy for you to forward boost yourself, but you regain energy by rotor shifting on the downhill. It takes some getting used to. Another thing, when I gave it a go, there's like when you do a grinding thing on the hoverboard on a pipe, it's not immediately obvious how you're meant to balance. You get the hang of it eventually, of trying to balance back and forth from one side to another, but it was a little different. Anyway, there's also this big roguelite aspect to the game, so you're kind of expected to die, respawn and upgrade, and then press onward. But in art style, I don't play much Fortnite, but for a little while there, I thought it was like built on Fortnite's assets. So to everyone who doesn't play Fortnite, it looks like Fortnite. But to anybody who does play Fortnite, I'm sure the differences are obvious, but I'm just too thick to understand them. Now, cost and delivery-wise, they're looking at $35,000 total to fund, with 22 days left to go in this. This project out of Bulgaria should be delivering, they think, by April of next year, and they're asking a $24 minimum buy-in for your digital game key that, again, is going to be delivered at presumably April of 2025, so 1 year out. So, Mr. Nice Guy, any thoughts? I mean, is this your jam? Is this not your jam?
This is my jam, dude. This looks really, really fun. It has like, man, it has the best of a lot of games that I'm a fan of. It has a little bit of Risk of Rain 2 vibes.
Okay.
It has some Borderland vibes. It has some Tony Hawk vibes, in that you're Tony Hawk Pro Skater vibes, in that you are grinding on a rail and having a good time. Now, Mac, I'm watching the video, and I'm trying to find the timestamp. There's a point in this video where the character falls through the floor, and I don't know if that, you noticed that too?
I did, and actually, it's I know you've got the sound off, but the person who's like announcing it says, you know, what do you want out of a game? You want bugs? We got bugs. Here's bugs, and then he shows you falling through the floor. So I think it's very tongue in cheek.
I was gonna say, there's no way that they didn't catch that, so that's good to know. But no, I mean, this game looks really, really good. I don't really have a lot to say that's not good about it. It's interesting how some of the bad stuff is funded by the time we find it, and some of the good stuff is like struggling to get their funding when you discover it. So I like the vibe. Yeah,
at this point in time, they're they're shy of $10,000 on their on their $35,000 goal. So yeah, I'm not sure what's holding people back. Maybe it's the $24 minimum buy-in. Maybe that seems a little high for an untested thing. But I think it's one of those things where it's like, I would object to buy-in that size if we were talking about a game that was less complicated and relied a lot less on, things you think about. If traveling, right? If movement on a hoverboard is your sort of main important thing to your game, then in order to make that, you've got to develop lots of large areas. You have to put together areas that aren't just samey, but have differences, that have elevations, slopes, things that work out well for keeping your speed or your tricks going. You need a lot of that setup. I don't remember, Mr. Nice Guy, but I feel like the Tony Hawk Pro Skater games only had something like between 10 and 30 distinct levels, right? Does that sound right to you?
They had very, very few levels. I would say
Okay.
it was like 10 tops in terms of within each game. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you think about something that you're trying to balance, not just a wide open area to have combat, but also an area that you can do your tricks in that feels distinct, I can understand why it takes a lot of, why it would take a lot of money. And, comparatively speaking, 35,000 is not a lot of money in Kickstarter terms, but why it would take a lot of money to go ahead and put together an experience that felt good. Anyway, I'll just say that you might be thinking, Mac, sometimes you say that $15 is too much for something. It's just like, yeah, I think sometimes some games weren't $15 game kind of efforts, but this is something that I think takes more effort, should cost more. So you know me, though. I've got a big rule, and that is if you're going to tell us that you can have a game ready in this case, a year, show us. And that's with a playable demo, and I'm happy to report that Overrider does have a playable demo that is available for you to try out. Hoverboarding is something that is cool, but doesn't have that many games in the sphere. So, glad to see a new hoverboarding game. Lam, what do you think?
I think kickstart this. This is unique, but it draws from a lot of other games really, really subtly. Not to the point of ripping them off, not to the point of me feeling like this is, something 2.0. And also, Mac, not to the point of trying to be everything to everybody. I think that this game looks awesome. Their business model seems solid. $24 is high, but I still say kickstart.
Kickstart for me as well. Obviously, we wish everybody the best, but we especially wish you guys the best here. Dream Tech, we hope that you're able to bring this one, because it looks good. And that's been Kick or Kickstart.
It does. I'm going to wish list it. And now it is time for Nerd Flex. A woo. We were harmonized right there. I like that your internet is better.
It's so nice that I'm not waiting 3/4 of a second anymore.
Well, hey, ladies and gentlemen, if you're here live, you have a job to do. I already see some people getting questions in the chat. That job is if you're here, you put questions in the chat. Gaming-related, multiple choice. Mac and I use nothing but our noggins to try to answer them. Here's the first question. Mac, would you do the honors?
Certainly. Ishmael asks, who was the manufacturer of the controller used in the ill-fated Titan submersible? Was it A, Sony, B, Microsoft, C, 8BitDo, or D, Logitech?
I am 90% sure that it was Logitech, if I remember correctly.
I, too, am 90% sure that it was Logitech. And not only because when you have a capital D and eyes that it automatically turns it into a big old gaping mouth emoji in the Twitch chat, which would be reason to select the D answer Logitech alone. But yeah, I'm pretty sure.
But also, here's the thing too, and I never thought about this at the time. How much of a fallout do you think there would have been if it was a Sony or Microsoft that he was using?
I mean,
I'm not even trying to make jokes. Like people died. Let's but I'm just saying.
I mean, I'm trying to make jokes, and I think there would have been some fallout. The amount of fallout people get from craziness was there, and Logitech is the correct answer with a joke as well from Ishmael. They couldn't afford anything like a DualShock or an Xbox controller, so clearly this was a laughing matter.
Clearly. We're so bad. We're going to get canceled. Question number 2 comes from Galvatron Type R. I've never thought about this before, but Galvatron Type R, is that a reference to R-Type, the video game? Never thought about that until just... Here's his question. What was the first Mortal Kombat game that did not feature Scorpion? And as usual, he has a bunch of options for us, Mac. MK3, MK Deadly Alliance, MK Deception, MK Armageddon, MK9, or MKX. First Mortal Kombat game that did not feature Scorpion. I'm going to immediately cross Mortal Kombat 3 off the list.
I'm leaning toward the middle of the pack.
Yeah. I was initially thinking one of the non-numbered ones, one of the ones that has like a subtitle like that, simply because it's likely that they were trying to try something different. So I was thinking Deadly Alliance or Deception. Armageddon? I don't know, man. Maybe Armageddon. All the characters are dead. We got to come up with new people. I don't know.
I feel like in Armageddon, it's happened and Scorpion caused it. That's what I feel in Armageddon. I'm going to go with you. How do you feel about Deadly Alliance?
Let's do Deadly Alliance. That was my first instinct.
Deadly Alliance, final answer. Galvatron, let us know how we did.
Oh, snap. I was wrong. I was very wrong.
Mortal Kombat 3. They added him in later after Gamer Outrage. Well, congratulations on your glorious trick question. I guess that does lead to a question as old as time. When is the game done? Is it the end of the updates, or is the game how it was on launch?
A really good point, right?
So
we'll give it to you.
I do like the question, though. All right, Buster Right On asks, Princess Zelda has appeared in most of the Legend of Zelda games, but there have been several games where she does not make an appearance. Which 3 are they? So we've got 4 options, and we need to identify the ones. We've got Link's Awakening, definitely, Majora's Mask, Triforce Heroes, and Skyward Sword. I think A, B, and C. I don't think Zelda shows up in Majora's Mask and Link's Awakening. I don't know about Triforce Heroes, but I'm pretty sure that there is a Princess Zelda in Skyward Sword. So I think A, B, and C are the 3. What do you think, Lon?
I trust your judgment. I actually am playing through Oracle of Ages and Seasons. I thought he was going to try to throw one of those in there. But yeah, I say A, B, and C.
Excellent. And Buster Right On confirms that A, B, and C is correct. Thank you for a fantastic question, Busta. Much appreciated.
Nice. Let's move on. That has been Nerdflex.
This is a sound test. You know the drill. It's a mystery sound from somewhere, somewhen, somehow in video gaming. Be sure to let us know on social media that episode 303's sound test if you know what it is, and you'll have a prize made by us sent to you. Listen up. You'll need it.
Is someone there?
Good luck. You'll need it.
That's the one. All right. Well, now we turn to a little bit of legalese.
Legalese.
For better and worse, the law has shaped and will continue to shape how we experience video games. And Lom, I've got a little bit of a legal odyssey to go on. And sadly, I know from the length here, not just like how far we are in the record already, because I can see that, but like also the wall of text that I have here, that this is going to have to be a 2-parter. But I do know that I can kind of start in one of 2 different places and then finish up next episode. So in order to adequately explain what's going on for the greater part here and why it's interesting, I've got to cover 2 things, and Lom, I hope you'll help me choose. The 2 things are arbitration and how it's applied in video games, and the other is contracts and minors. And what do you think, Lom? We can start on either spot. What do you say?
I'm a father. I'm interested in contracts and minors. Let's hear about that.
Okay, we'll start there, and next time we'll talk about arbitration. So I'm going to take you all the way back to 1950, a case called Niemand v. Dervish. It involves, among other things, a second family, a minor, a promissory note. Doesn't that just sound exciting already? We enter one Albert Dervish, a fella living in LA, married to a woman still living in Idaho. He meets a 20-year-old named Marilyn, and he lies to Marilyn and says, "There's no one in my life but you, baby," the scoundrel. Now, it is worth noting that at this time, they get married in California, all the while he's still married to poor Marjorie, who's back in Idaho. Gasp. Now, early on in their marriage, before Marilyn turns 21, right, which is the age of majority at this time in this place, Albert has her sign something that, unbeknownst to her, turns out to be a huge loan of money. Money that she never saw because Albert uses it on Marjorie, his other wife and family back in Idaho. So Marilyn never knows about the money. Now, Albert, he's a crafty son of a gun, so it takes a little while, right, before Marilyn figures out that he's got the second family. And once she does, she files for divorce, and obviously the divorce is granted, of course, because how do you say no to a request like that? These are the days of our lives, Lom.
Now, I wonder, does he take half of her money? Like, was she rich? Because it's California.
Wait. She doesn't have quite that much money, and she's also in debt for this big loan of money from this promissory note. And Albert runs away, and the plot thickens because since the bank can't find Albert anymore, since the rascal has skipped town, that rascal, they come after Marilyn for the money. But she is off the hook, and for a reason that maybe you might not expect. When the lawsuit comes her way, I'll give the quote here, quote, "The law shields minors from their lack of judgment and experience, and under certain conditions vests in them the right to disaffirm their contracts. Although in many instances such disaffirmation may be a hardship on those who deal with an infant," which, I kid you not, in the 1950s, that's what they called minors. All minors. 2 years old, 20 years old. You're all infants. But it may be a hardship upon those who deal with an infant. The right to avoid her contracts is conferred by law upon a minor for her protection against her own improvidence and the designs of others. It is the policy of the law to protect a minor from herself and her indiscretions and immaturity, as well as against the machinations of other people, and to discourage adults from contracting with an infant. Any loss occasioned by the disaffirmation of a minor's contract would have been avoided by declining to enter into the contract. So, and that's the quote.
So I guess maybe I missed something. I'm trying to figure out what this has to do with video games, number one. I was laughing too hard, so maybe I missed it. But secondly, she can make the decision to get married, which is entering into a contract, but then can't be held accountable for the result of that contract. That, to me, that's backwards. But
So the marriage gets nullified because he was already married to somebody else in another state. And of course, back in the 50s, much harder to, collate that data. So she gets granted that. But because Albert skips town, the bank tries to come after her for the money that he took out. She did sign the contract, not knowing what it was, but never saw any of the money. And so the court, using that big line, is just like, hey, look, she entered into this when she was still a minor. And she can disaffirm the contract. And she does. If she had actually gotten some money, maybe she would pay you back some money. But she never got her hands on it. And, you can't come after her for that contract that undertook with her when she was a minor. This is a sort of, don't try making contracts with children businesses. And so that's the main holding of this disaffirmation of a contract with a minor. But Mr. Nice Guy, you're right. This has basically, not quite, almost nothing to do with video games. But I promise you, it will when we come back for part 2, arbitration, and then what's going on right now in video gaming and why it's interesting. But you gotta understand disaffirmation first, or none of the other stuff makes sense.
That's crazy. I'm excited to hear what happened. It's gonna be something wild, like, so she tracked him down, and he was playing video games. And then she slapped the Mountain Dew out of his hand, and it bounced off the wall and gave him a concussion, and he sued her. But they said, hey, you're a minor, so you can't be held accountable. I'm excited to hear what it is. It's got to be something crazy, some Jerry Springer level drama. I'm excited.
Well, I don't want to disappoint, so I will be honest that it's not nearly as exciting as this first part. This was definitely the Days of Our Lives soap opera level stuff.
Well, thank you for that, Mac. And you know what? We got to wrap things up. I got to get some sleep. I got to play some Helldivers 2. I got things to do, and I know Mac has things to do too. But hey, thank you for tuning in. Before we go, we have one last segment called What We've Been Watching and What We've Been Playing, where we talk about just that, the cool, nerdy stuff we've been into. Mac, what have you been into?
You know, real quick, I've been playing some games, some stuff that we'll talk about later, but one big one made possible by friend of the show, Ishmobile, who provided me with that larger capacity, playing some Resident Evil 2 Remake.
Nice. On the deck?
Yeah, on the deck.
Nice. How's it play on the deck? Smooth?
It probably plays better than it would play on this potato of a PC, that's for sure. But that's basically what I've been playing. As for watching, I've mostly just been watching a little bit of some of the past episodes of Taskmaster. Good, funny British comedy game show.
Love to hear it. I need a new funny show in my life. I don't think Fallout is going to be a funny show.
Definitely not.
I am excited for that to launch tomorrow. It may have some humor, like the ghouls may be kind of funny. There's some characters on there, but we'll see. So, I mean, I showed y'all at the beginning the games that I picked up at Midwest Gaming Classic. I've obviously been playing a lot of retro stuff on my Analog Pocket. I would say probably my favorite game so far is Batman the video game. It's based out of this lot. It's basically Super Mario Land, but Batman, and it's really, really good. And also, been playing Balatro, and I listened to last week's episode. I said that Balatro is a poker-based Metroidvania. That is absolutely not true. It's a poker-based roguelite, and I do know the difference. But I've been playing a little bit more of that, and then the occasional Helldivers with my homies. As far as watching, not a lot. March Madness, watching a lot of YouTube videos of people collecting video games, and just having fun with that, relaxing. Did watch Catching Fire, Hunger Games with my son, who just finished the books, and that's about it.
Nice.
Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in to episode 303 of Two Nerds in a Pod, nerdiest video game podcast in the galaxy. I am Lom. That is Mac. We are friends. You're our friends, too. Thank you for tuning in. Remember, video games are art, and please, please, please be excellent. Keep it nerdy, y'all. Deuces.
See ya.